thanks a lot for being here today, Austin. Austin, I just start with like a brief summary of what I know about you.
For sure, man.
And now we just jump into your topic. So I know Austin from being like starting at Hardstart and wanting to have an office space for his new project. But before we got into that, he's coming from America, and as far as I know, from Huntington, Indiana. Then coming over because of now his wife Julia, and starting here the Sunflowerproject, and now also studying psychology at the University of Twente. Anything I forgot should add, or is that?
Oh no, yeah, that's a pretty good overview, man. I mean, just what we talked about a little bit before. So when we first got involved with psychedelics, we weren't really sure.
Yeah. So
how you format a project, right? There's not a lot of like successful templates where it's like, this was a sneaker company, so then they were super successful, so try to follow that formula. Like a lot of these places didn't have very good online presence, and like I said, we're very hippie, so we kind of kept testing projects and we tried that one and like I said, it sort of ran into a dead end because there's not a lot of revenue. Like you can't really do much other than ask for donations, and so we wanted to open it up a little bit more, make it a little bit more fun, and try to figure out a way to where we can have income so we can do cooler projects. And so that's when I was started working on the Collective Unconscious, which was...
I think we should start a bit like earlier. You mentioned a couple of things: the Sunflowerproject, Conscious Mind, and overall psychedelics is your major topic right now.
Yeah, I met a couple girls at school where they're like, "Oh, you're that mushroom guy, right?" I was like, "Yeah, maybe."
How does even start? How do you get into that, and what are you doing right now about it?
Yeah, so we talked about this a couple of times. I think I told you a little bit about it, and then when you and Mark sat down, we talked about it too. So I didn't have anything to do with psychedelics. I didn't really know much about them. Like they never really came up in my mind. To me, that was just the same as like cocaine or heroin. It was just another drug. And I met Julia when we were in Chicago with my wife now, and we got married like a couple months after knowing each other. She got pregnant. Everything was great. We were really excited. And then she was diagnosed with cervical cancer during one of like her pregnancy checkups. And so we said, let's move to Germany. There's really good healthcare in Germany. She's had the insurance her whole life. She's like, it'll be great. We'll have the baby there. We can sort of get away. It's a nice place for kids. Maybe we stay. And so we moved. And what sort of, I guess, coupled with that was she had some like childhood traumas that she wasn't really over, but I guess were repressed. And they sort of came up as well during the whole thing. And she studied psychology as well. And she's spent a lot of time working in like rehabilitation clinics and special needs institutions and things like that. And so she's always sort of been around it. And she was like, all right, well, I've got to figure out something to get better, right? So she called a doctor, and the doctor suggested, you should go see a therapist. And that took like 6 months to get in. And it's like crazy backed up in Germany. Like it takes a long time if somebody needs help to really get in to see a psychologist. So for like example, I need to get an ADD checkup here in Germany to be able to get prescribed medicine for it. And we've called like every psychologist we could find within like 3 hours of here. And they're like, no, we're booked. Like that's not high enough up on the list. Like we've got more important things to deal with. You're out of luck. And so it's been like crazy to try to get through that. So it was like months and months of waiting. And then she finally got in, and the psychologist goes, you should take this medicine. It won't make you better, but it will make things bearable, kind of like the middle ground. And then she would go and she'd do this therapy a couple times a month. And after like 4 or 5 months, the therapist was like, there's a bunch of stuff that I don't really know how to fix. Sorry. You should go to like an outpatient clinic, like somewhere where you go live for like 10 weeks. With other people who are sick, and you basically go through group therapy, which was funny because my wife was one of those counselors growing up, and she's like, I don't know if this is going to be effective. I don't want to spend 10 weeks away from you and the kids. And so I was doing research online, and I was actually reading a book that she gave me, and it mentioned ayahuasca in the book, and I had no idea what that was. And the book talked about it, and talked about sort of the chemistry that it changes in your brain. And I remembered that, and I was like, I wonder, so I started Googling and I started looking around, and I found a lot of articles about researchers at Johns Hopkins using psilocybin to help people with depression or anxiety, specifically people who had terminal cancer, and they knew they were going to die, but they were very anxious about it. They gave this group a dose of psilocybin, a high dose in a controlled setting, like magic mushrooms. So they gave this group, magic mushrooms in this controlled setting, and there was like 80% of them that had the anxiety relieved. And they called it one of the most like important experiences of their life, like up there with being married or having a child. Like the results were crazy. And so I sort of told her, I was like, this is legal in the Netherlands. Like if it's go to this 10-week program or try this, like what do you want to do? And she's like, all right, I'll try it. And yeah, she had a really crazy experience, man. And she went from having nightmares like every night to none at all. And I'm still so like crazy.
From one intake?
From one, I would say, medium to high dose of the psilocybin truffles, which are slightly different, pretty much the same thing. The active ingredient is psilocybin, which I believe gets ingested and turned into psilocin, which is then, so truffles and mushrooms are basically the same. But yeah, single high dose. And that was on March 10th. 2017, because then on March 11th I had like a $500 Amazon bill from all the books that I ordered because I was like mind blown by this. And then ever since then I just kind of got more and more into it and really interested in it. And it kind of speaks to the inner like curious sort of explorer in me. Like this huge field is out there with a lot of potential, and it's sort of like a diamond in the rough. Like not a lot of people pay attention to it yet, but I think that's going to slowly change. Similar with like marijuana. It sort of went from very taboo to accepted widely over the course of like 15 or 20 years. So.
And you want to tap more into the psychedelics and what it can do for the human.
Yeah, so psychedelics was kind of the starting point, and the more that we dove into it, what we kind of figured out was if you picture like a big room and there's like a bunch of different doors on the room, there's like different ways that you can get in, right? Mm-hmm. So this room is, you can call it like an altered state of consciousness. So in psychology, you have normal waking consciousness, which is like when you wake up, you stretch, you walk around, your blood starts flowing, and you feel what you call normal. Yeah. That's what they call like normal waking consciousness. And anything that sort of deviates from that is called like an altered state of consciousness or a non-ordinary state of consciousness. And basically, if you really break down your day from when you wake up till when you go to bed, almost everything that people do is trying to alter their state of consciousness. They're trying to feel better, more awake. They're trying to feel sleepy and more relaxed. So you wake up and you drink coffee, and then you eat food a lot of times with like sugar in it, and that's sort of an unconscious habit, like eating a ton of, especially in America, you get like your whole daily serving of sugar just in breakfast, which is crazy. And then you listen to music, or you go to the gym, or you watch a movie, or you watch something on your phone, and you're constantly sort of trying to get out of your head in an attempt to feel better. And for some people it's alcohol or cigarettes, porn, like the list, IMAX theaters, the list goes on forever. Yeah. There's actually a really interesting book called Stealing Fire where they talk about this, and they say that the altered states economy is like a $3 trillion economy if you take into account the money people spend to sort of try to get out of their heads, right?
To just get to a different state what they just want to be in right now.
Yeah, maybe it's to feel better, or maybe you've known the people who, Friday rolls around and they get really drunk to sort of like, wash away the week, and then
to just get the kick of something, right?
Yeah, and I don't really know what I would call that kick. If it's like I feel bad and I want to feel better, or if it's just habitual. For example, like a lot of us check our phones. And when you pull down to refresh your feed, that mechanism is actually made to resemble a slot machine. Yeah. So it's very addicting to where you try to refresh it, and sometimes it doesn't work. They do that on purpose because then it adds the element of chance. So you sort of get addicted very easily to doing this. It was like Candy.
Funny, I just recently heard about that same thing.
Yeah, man, it's like Candy Crush. It's like you don't consider it a problem, but it really quickly can be, right? And so if you look at it from that perspective, we're constantly trying to get out of our heads. The question for me was, all right, what tools really work? Like, porn is a losing game. Alcohol is a losing game. Almost everything can be a losing game if you don't use it properly. But I think that there are specific tools that can make you feel better, more productive, open, whatever it is, very effectively with minimal side effects. And so I think psychedelics are one of those, but there's definitely other tools that we're interested in, such as meditation, sensory deprivation, the light machine, which causes a sort of dream-like, it's called like a hypnagogic state, which is kind of
briefly,
it's kind of that state where you're sort of falling asleep, sort of awake. And like, so for example, with like the hypnagogic state, hypnagogic is when you're falling asleep, and I think it's hypnopompic is when you're waking up. And so this author who wrote, Stephen Coulter, he wrote the book Flow, which is sort of like an altered state. There's different words for it, but flow and altered states are very similar. They could even be the same thing. We're not sure. What he says he does is he wakes up at 3:30 in the morning, and he grabs coffee, he runs to his laptop, and within like 5 minutes of waking up, he's typing. Because for him, that's that hypnopompic state where he's just sort of waking up, he feels more creative. And so there's a lot of really interesting doors into this room of altered states of feeling better. And like I said, some of them take years of practice and they work very slowly, like meditation. Mm-hmm. And there's others like psychedelic that catalyze like a very rapid change, almost in like a snap. And so what we wanted to do was just sort of study these and figure out like what are the pros and cons. Can these tools be effective? Can the side effects be minimized? And can people actually start to use these tools in a systematic way to where they can start to improve their life, I guess. Yeah.
What would you look for, use the psychedelics for the kind of most proper way, or which way do you think can they be used the most effective?
I don't know. It's kind of a tricky question because I think... Like I was talking about this with Tim. There's a lot of different, I guess you could say, uses for psychedelics. Like it claims to cure a lot of different things. But as far as if somebody was approaching psychedelics who've never done it before, I think the easiest way to approach it is, so here in the Netherlands, there's certain psychedelics that are legal. I think truffles are the easiest to have access to. It's safe to just go to Cosmic Kitchen, buy truffles. You know where they come from. You know, you don't want to buy illegal stuff off of the street. But I would say I would categorize it into doses. So you have something like a microdose, which a lot of people are starting to talk about now. Like especially when you hear about they microdose in Silicon Valley and all those things like that. So what a microdose is it's a sub-perceptual dose of a psychedelic. A lot of times it's LSD. Because it's easier to measure out the precise dose, which is very important when it comes to LSD, because it's just a tiny drop is incredibly powerful. It's really crazy. So what a microdose is it's sub-perceptual, which means you don't actually experience any hallucinations. But people sort of describe it, I would say the most general description is like, I don't know what's different, but I feel better. I feel more alert, more there. Some people compare it to a cup of coffee. I'm not sure if that's a good comparison, but when you take a microdose, the general use for that would be, like I said, like feeling better to just generally feel better and have more energy, to be more creative or more productive, and that sort of falls into that field.
I also looked into like some YouTube videos about like the microdose, and people like often describe it as, I just saw suddenly that the blue is bluer than before, or it's just nicer outside, and it experienced so many. The forest is suddenly really awesome.
Yeah, you can take that all the way down. Like the forest is more foresty,
or
the world was more worldy, or my water was more watery. Like
it's a bit weird how they describe it, but I think like at least a tiny bit of it. It's possible to see with meditation. At least for me, I see that sometimes. If I have, for example, a longer period of meditation, then you also actually see those things and look at it and like, oh wow, I didn't pay attention to it. And it seems that it's like a similar effect that with what the people say with the microdoses. Then they start paying attention more to those details and more to those smaller things.
Do you meditate a lot, man?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah? What do you do? Like,
most of the time I actually do like sort of breathing meditation, and often also guided to like just because it's just easier to stay focused on it if somebody reminds you every now and then. But I often also for a longer period of time, like 45 minutes or something, completely free. And sometimes just, okay, what pops in my mind I write down, or then just see that I really try to focus on my breathing. Because that seems for me the most effective method to get into this state of seeing, okay, everything seems right now to be more bluer or foresty or whatever, and just makes a nice feeling.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I would say that meditation daily you could see very similar effects to doing a microdose. And then so obviously there's the pros and cons, and you have a lot of people who are firmly like, meditation's meditation. It's completely different. Like this comes up in, I was talking with Tim about this earlier, like Buddhism a lot.
Yeah.
Like, should psychedelics be allowed or not? Is there a place for them? And I guess it's just sort of how you want to view it. So for me, the easiest way, if we're going to do something like compare psychedelics versus meditation, which wins, which is better, you know what I mean? Like a fight. It's kind of apples and oranges. I would look at it, I think I told you and Mark this as well. Yeah, so I picture it like a rock. Yeah. If you take the rock, you put it in the river, and the water runs over it constantly for years, eventually you're going to get this nice smooth rock, right? And that's great if you have a lot of time. Generally, too, if you have money on your hands. Like, you can't meditate for 20 minutes a day and then have like a crazy stressful life. Like, you have to bring the meditation into the whole day. So if it's just like 10 minutes of awesome meditation and then just craziness the rest of the day, it won't work. So I think there's certain factors. There's also no excuse. I mean, anybody can meditate. It's free. But then I would say that psychedelics are like dynamite, right? So if you're like this big giant rock and you need to sort of make up some ground quick because you don't have forever, you know what I mean? Like if you're in the river, it's going to take so much longer than this guy who's, rock was like this. And I think that psychedelics like dynamite are dangerous, yes. But dynamite with the proper safety, the proper use in the proper hands with people who have been trained to use it, very rarely somebody dies from it when the proper steps are taken. And so I think that would be the best metaphor to sort of set those in. There's meditation that's water. Yeah. It's years and years of sort of this mundane practice. Like you sort of drown yourself in this monotony. So just to sort of refresh your brain. Yeah. Basically. And with psychedelics, it's some people, like I said, say it's fake, but to me I would say it doesn't replace meditation. But it can do one of two things, like I said. So you can make up ground very quickly, and sometimes you can have these lasting changes. Like with my wife, she never had a nightmare after that. And for me, the experience that I had was more of, I took psychedelics and it sort of laid out this blueprint for me. Like, this is what could happen if you sort of got your shit together. Yeah. But I still have to like meditate every day. It's not like magic. You can't take the magic mushrooms and everything's fixed. Like you're going to be the next Steve Jobs. Like he took LSD. I'll take it. I'll be the next Steve Jobs. It doesn't really work like that.
You still got to work for it.
You still got to do the dirty laundry. And I think meditation is
the dirty
laundry in that regard. Like you've got to do it even if it's not fun. And for me, my brain is so active, and I'm always in my very logical thinking brain, and it's not necessarily healthy or productive. And so I really have to work to make sure I sit down for the 20 minutes that I'm not too harsh on myself, but I'm not too relaxed, and you just sort of find that nice middle ground where yeah. And then it's great. So yeah, no, I mean, those are two techniques, but so there's a lot of other interesting ones too, like I said. So I'm really interested in the light machine. And so they've got this light machine that induces the hypnagogic state, and it drops you into this sort of deep meditative state after a couple minutes. And even if it's hard for your mind to drift off because your eyes are closed and you've got this flashing light and you can't really get distracted because the light is so overbearing. Okay. And so for me, I see something like that, and I think that's great. It sort of helps people overcome the learning curve. Oh, okay. Yeah. Because it's like it takes a while sometimes to get good at meditation, and a lot of people quit because they're not good at it right away. Okay, you could say everybody's willpower needs to increase. That's one way. Or you could induce these different forms of technology they're like training wheels, right? And to me, I think those are very exciting tools and techniques, things like technology or VR to sort of induce these altered states as well. But then also, like I said, like a sensory deprivation tank. That's cool. Like there's just a lot of different doors out there. And we're really excited.
Done that already, right?
Yeah, man. It's crazy
Want to share that experience with that?
Yeah, I did it once when I was in Chicago, and it's called a lot of them are called like Float Central or
What's happening when you do that?
So you've got this tank, and it's water heated to your body temperature. And it's filled with just a ton of Epsom salt. So you know how they say if you go to the Dead Sea, you float because there's so much salt? Same thing here. And the tank is completely dark. It's generally in a quiet place, so I'm not sure if they're technically soundproof, but you don't get a lot of sound other than sort of the noise from the tank. That's like a white noise. And after like 15 or 20 minutes of being in there, you sort of lose feeling of where your body is, and you sort of detach from this. I don't know how to explain it than that. You're just like a face, and then take that back one more step and you're just like a thought. And then all of a sudden, like, you don't feel where your body is, and you sort of have this altered state experience, or this psychedelic experience. And it can be like, I think it can be like deeply meditative. Like, you can really, if you accompany it with breath work or sort of meditation techniques, it works good in combination. So like, if you go in there and fuck around, it's not going to work. If you go in there and you breathe properly, it will work better, right? So a lot of these tools can be used in conjunction. A lot of times people fall asleep and then they're like, oh, there was like a super deep rest. That was awesome. I feel like I just slept 100 hours. And so that happens for some people too. But it's a really cool experience, man. I suggest it. There's some in Amsterdam that you can actually check out.
Okay.
It's a really cool, and it's relaxing. It's like a spa. It's like a spa. So.
How expensive is such a thing?
Like anywhere between like $50 and $100. I'm not sure.
Oh,
I'm not sure. Depending on the place that you go, how long you go for. Sometimes they have couples tanks where you can float with your like significant other. It's a little cheesy for me, but it's out there if you're looking for it.
Okay. I actually expected it more expensive, to be honest.
I'm not sure. You have to check. I think it's between 50 and 100 euros. I'm pretty sure you can find some places for like between 50 and 100 euros, half hour to an hour session. Could be. Is that you said that's accurate? Cool. If Tim says yes, then I believe it. But yeah, man. Yeah. And sort of, I guess, where it intersects with what you want to do with your podcast and sort of your idea, like you talked about, you like to learn how to be more productive and be sort of, you know? And I think willpower is cool. I think you should rely on your willpower. But I don't know. I also think that it's fine to use tools. Like, people ride bikes to campus because you don't have to walk. Like, it's all right. Yeah. You know, people wear backpacks and have laptops. Like, using technology and using tools is fine. And I think that for techniques like this to become accepted, they sort of need to be sifted away from like religion and hippies and all the sort of stigmas that go with things like meditation and psychedelics. Yeah. It needs to be looked at in a very factual way. And then if people want to use these tools to be more productive, I really don't see why not. And I really don't have a moral or ethical dilemma when it comes to that.
Yeah, you also mentioned before already, like the actual danger of such drugs in comparison to smoking or alcohol. Can just like, what was it again? Yeah,
so they did this guy named David Nutt, who I really like. He's a professor at, I believe, Imperial College London, who does a lot of the psychedelic research. It's really cool if you want to check it out. Yeah. He did a study where it was first, I forget what it was called. He made up a fake drug called like equestracy, like equestrian and ecstasy mix. He made up this fake drug. And basically what the study proved was that horseback riding is more dangerous than ecstasy by like 300%. Like, the people who die or are seriously injured from horseback riding every year is way more than anyone who ever takes ecstasy. Yet our attitudes towards ecstasy are different than our attitudes towards horseback riding. Why is that?
But is that because more people are doing horse riding than ecstasy, or
per capita? So he obviously accounted for that. And he got fired from his job. He was like the head of the drug board in London. And there's this huge outrage. And he was like, I don't understand. Like, I made a point. It's kind of a funny point, but it's true. And they fired him. And then it was either before or after that they did another study, but they basically ranked how harmful drugs are. So how harmful they are to you, the social harm, things like that. And alcohol is like 86 out of 100. And it's in this study, it's the most dangerous drug. And it's higher than heroin, it's higher than cocaine. And then you have magic mushrooms that are psilocybin, that's 4 out of 100. And you have LSD, that's 12 out of 100.
But dangerous in what sense? Like,
so the physical harm, like how addicting is it? How toxic is it? Is it easy to overdose? And then social harm. So like if somebody drinks, what kind of father are they going to be? What kind of worker are they going to be? What kind of husband or wife are they going to be? Right. And they sort of account these things. Like when someone starts to drink heavily, do they lose their jobs quickly? Yes. Okay, well then that's higher social harm. So they took a lot of these into account. But what I really thought was genius, and when I found this study was, so they had this study with green bars, and then they had a study with blue bars where they asked the public, how dangerous do you think a drug is? And the chart was completely flipped. you had like, oh, alcohol's not dangerous at all. And then LSD was way up here. So it's like how dangerous drugs actually are completely opposite from whether they really are or not. And it's this weird thing. We don't have to go too far down this road, but it's sort of this cultural idea of like I guess the media sort of tells us what's acceptable and what's not, because it's certainly not based on facts. It's certainly not based on, well, is this drug dangerous? Yes, it's illegal. And I guess just to sort of avoid that, we would need better education. So, for example, a lot of people think, like, if I asked you which is more addicting, cigarettes or heroin, most people say heroin.
Obviously, yeah.
Right, yeah, but it doesn't really work like that. Like, cigarettes are way more addicting than heroin by a lot. And if you look at it, like how you would train a dog, right? If you say, sit, good boy, sit, good boy, sit, good boy, and then at the end of the day, you gave the dog a big, juicy steak, right? He would not learn the habit nearly as, or the behavior nearly as quickly as if you said, sit, good boy, and then you gave him a little treat right away.
Yeah.
And by doing that little bit constantly throughout the day, something becomes very habitual and built into your daily routine. So something like smoking a cigarette, you run a way higher risk of being addicted than this one big hit of heroin.
It's connected to after eating, when waking up. I don't know, these habits.
Exactly. Or like
just a break in the train. Oh, can you go outside for 5 minutes?
Just because you can, and it almost becomes unconscious, and so it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. I'm not saying that heroin is good or that people should do heroin. I'm simply saying that we should have a better understanding of drugs, and we should make laws and decisions about those drugs based on science, based on statistics, and not on public opinion. Because there's a lot of people like my wife that psychedelics could help. And the example that I like to give was he wasn't my real grandfather. He was my mom's best friend. I lived with them. They're this old couple, and I lived with them when I was young for like 3 years while my parents were saving up for a house. And her name was Star, and her husband's name was David. So he was like my grandpa, not officially, right? And he was in Vietnam, and he was part of this group called Tiger Force. And after, it sounds cool, but like basically they had no supervision for years, and this group just did awful things. And like after the war in like the early 2000s, like half of this platoon went to jail, and they were in their like 60s and 70s, and they went to jail for all these war crimes. It was this huge scandal.
Okay. And
he didn't do any of that, so he didn't end up going to jail. But I wasn't allowed to play Call of Duty. I wasn't allowed to watch movies with guns in the house, because if he heard a gun, he would freak out. And he would sometimes wake up and like choke his wife because he would be scared, like, I'm still in the jungle. He would have bad dreams and then wake up thinking he was still there. And so it makes me wonder, like, okay, if something like psychedelics were taken into more seriously and looked at and stayed legal and research was allowed to be done, there's a good chance that I gotta restart this.
Okay.
We said that it was going to happen. I should be more casual about it. No, I think I've got it now, though. Yeah. There's a good chance that he could have had years of good sleep. There's a good chance that, if you're having nightmares that are reoccurring and you have PTSD symptoms and you're having nightmares, that you could go to a therapist who's been trained to use this. You can do it in a controlled environment, taking into account set and setting. And maybe it took one dose, maybe it took a few more. Like, it varies, but it kind of makes me sad that it's illegal and very taboo, because it could do a lot of people a lot of good. I think that sort of varies away from self-development, but that's what the core of the project is for me.
No, but also you mentioned a lot of positive things about what psychedelics can do. Maybe also tapping into a bit, okay, what are some of the dangers like for sure that for example, if I would as a beginner use any kind of those psychedelics, what would you like?
Right. So we were talking. So we were talking a little earlier, and I said like there's 3 different ways to take them. So you've got your low dose, which is like a microdose, which is subperceptual, and then you have a slightly higher dose. I would say a low to medium dose. Can be used for, and this is a generalization, so this is not like this is how the 3 layers go, but for me this is how I kind of interpret it. For me, a low to medium dose, you can use it for like sort of like self-development, like if you're sort of like I'm not sure what I should do with my life. I'm not sure. Like, for me, it's sort of sometimes good to take for sort of self-development or for creativity. And that sort of is in there. But then when you get up into higher doses, I would consider them I would say never take a high dose recreationally. Like, don't take psychedelics recreationally at all, is what I would say. I would say do it with purpose. But if you take a high dose recreationally, you run a really high risk of something going wrong if you don't control the set and setting. So with the high dose, when I say therapeutic, I mean people who go through it, a lot of times they'll relive like traumatic experiences, like bad things that happened to them, like the classic bad trip. The trip can be very intense and sometimes too much. You can feel sort of this onset of what a lot of people describe as psychosis, like losing your mind. And these things happen when you get into high doses. And there are very rare cases where someone has taken a psychedelic and never fully recovered. It's rare, but it does happen. And so when someone's taking a psychedelics, you want to screen for things like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. Someone who has that, you definitely don't want to take psychedelics. For sure. So there are these sort of parameters. Right. And I had a friend who, for example, he took a really high dose of it. It was either LSD or psilocybin at like a festival. And he got so just far out there that he was unable to speak. He was really freaking out, having a hard time. He couldn't communicate it to anybody. And that's a very bad idea, because when you're just sort of at a concert, there's a lot of things that could happen. You're in a very vulnerable state. And if someone were to sort of mess with you, you know, like, yeah, the world's ending, like, to them it's sort of funny, but for you it can really cause a lot of harm. And there are a lot of instances at retreats, or what we would call like bad shamans, where people do abuse this, and they do abuse people while they're in these vulnerable states. And so bad trips happen. They can be, and usually are, very beneficial, right? So you can go through a tough experience.
Bad trips are beneficial.
Yeah, there's a phrase by Joseph Campbell where he says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek." And so for me, and for a lot of people, I think they describe it the same way, bad trips can be very beneficial, and something bad happening doesn't necessarily have to be bad. Like reliving a traumatic experience can also be very freeing at the end of it, but that also doesn't mean that, you know, you should just take them and then not really care. So the two biggest things, if you're going to take psychedelics recreationally, which this isn't like professional advice, this is just my personal opinion from research and reading, I would say it's a general consensus with a lot of like psychonauts or psychedelic explorers. The two things you want to control are set and setting. So the first thing is set. That's sort of your mental perception of what psychedelics are. So if you've never taken them, it's good to like read like what to expect, the things that could happen, to read maybe trip reports from people who've tripped before and sort of documented their experience, or to talk to a friend or an expert or someone who's done it. So you sort of conceptualize, all right, this isn't like drinking a cocktail. This isn't like smoking a joint. Like this is going to be something very different. Right. And you sort of have to prepare for it mentally. So that's what I'd consider set. And then the other half of that is setting. And that's, do you feel safe? Are you in a safe environment? Do you have people around you that you trust? Is it warm and loving? Do you have nice music on? So for example, they say that you don't want to listen to like rap music and music with words that you can understand. There's classical music is really good. Sort of this deep meditative or ambient music like Brian Eno tracks, like these hour-long tracks can be really good. You can actually find a psilocybin playlist by Johns Hopkins researcher on Spotify if you're interested in listening to it. It's a great playlist, man. And you can kind of see it's like very intense music at first, and it's classical, and then it kind of turns into this like kind of earthy music towards the end to calm you down. But music is a big part. It's something that I'm very interested in, because you can have a wide range of different experiences with music. So that's something to take in. Like I said, if you're around people you trust, is someone going to mess with you? Do they feel safe? If you need help, like getting up and going to the bathroom, you have people that like, yeah, they'll help you. You know what I mean? You really want that safe environment, because like I said, you are in a very vulnerable state. And if you can prevent those things, yes, you can go through tough things on your trip, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be traumatized by it. Then on the flip side, if you go through something in a trip and it's bad, and then you don't have this sort of support system around you, you're out at a concert, you get lost, you get separated from your friends, whatever it is, then that's a lot of time when these like traumas can happen, to where you're sort of scarred from it. And like I said, there are separate instances where they do it in a controlled setting and people still have sometimes flashbacks, and they sort of have like a psychedelic PTSD. They're very shook by it, but also that's very rare, like less than 0.1% from what the data shows. So
okay. That's fucking good.
Right. It's less dangerous than like a toaster. It's less dangerous than using the restroom. I mean, I know more people who've died on the toilet, but it's not necessarily something like you're going to die. It's a lot more to do with the mind. Like, you know, you can cause some damage if you're not careful. So be careful, kids. But, yeah, man. Do you think you're gonna try? You think you're gonna try any of these? Like any of the things I've talked about so far? You seemed interested in the deprivation tank.
I do see, especially deprivation tank, because I obviously also have like the distance to the psychedelics just because of how I grew up, and therefore the tank is for me like the closest to any like mind opening techniques or anything like that, which is more than meditation. And so I think before I would tap into some psychedelics, I would rather try the tank to have, I guess, a bit more control over what happens to me, because psychedelics have no clue what then happens. And at least like the deprivation tank, it still seems more controllable, as probably you can also just end it then, instead of like if once you took it, it's pretty hard to end it, I guess.
So that's another pro and con, but that's also something kind of funny, because that's almost the whole point a lot of times of psychedelics, is to not try to control it and to not try to be in charge of the ride. And that's usually a big, I would say, learning block for a lot of people who take it. Definitely. Like you take it and you basically know you're not in control. And a lot of times something that can spur a bad trip is sort of fighting the current. Like especially when you take it, you sort of just have to just go with the flow and float downstream. That's the Beatles song, "Turn Off Your Mind, Relax, Float Downstream." That's exactly what they're talking about. This is not dying. That's okay. Basically that's what they sing about. They're saying you're not dying, calm down, and sort of go with it. And so, but I do agree. So for some people, all right, I really want to test it and completely relinquish control. Some people want to have something like the light machine or the sensory deprivation tank. You can open your eyes, you can get out of the tank, and that's great. So like I said, it's not necessarily me telling you this is a good tool, this is a bad tool. The whole point of the project, and when we start our video series, is just to explore these different tools, hopefully objectively tell you the pros and cons. And so you'll sort of have a list of, here's all the things that people use to alter their consciousness. Here's ones that we found work pretty well. Here are the pros and cons. Here's ones that don't work so well. Like, don't use alcohol to feel better, It's an obvious one, but some people still might not know. And then we want to sort of build a calendar or a system to where you can say, all right, meditation is something I can do on a daily basis, so I'm going to do that daily, and you sort of pencil that in. And then you want something that's maybe weekly, so maybe you go to a yoga class once a week, or a dance class. That's another really good way. Or exercise, like long distance runners and dancers, they're doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. They're using this as a sort of method to get out of their heads. And someone who's really dancing or really performing like an extreme sport at a high level, they're in an altered state. They're not thinking consciously. They're in this state of flow. And so maybe something weekly is like a dance class, or I would suggest for a lot of people, jiu-jitsu. I would consider that one of them.
Why especially jiu-jitsu?
It's kind of weird, man. I first kind of started coming up with this because I noticed a lot of people into psychedelics are also into jiu-jitsu, like Joe Rogan and a lot of the people on that. And I'm not sure really what it is, man, but doing jiu-jitsu, it's a very like humbling experience. It's this exercise, and you're basically fighting with this person, trying to kill them, but then at the end, instead of like really choking them, they tap out and it's a game and it's done. And it's just this very intense, and like I said, for a lot of people, sort of this doorway out of their head. Extreme sports is the same way. There's something called the Flow Genome Project in Texas, and they experiment a lot with, like when someone is on a BMX bike and they're doing flips, that gravity and that pull from doing the flips actually pulls people into these altered states. And so they built this big gyroscope that you can get inside, and it spins you and it drops you into the state just the same. So that's kind of off track, but you should have things that are daily, like meditation I think is great. Weekly could be like a yoga class. Monthly, maybe for some people it could be like or every 3 months it could be a psychedelic trip, or it could be going to a psytrance concert, which trance is another really big one that puts you in an altered state, where people say they feel like the crowd was one big thing. That's the same thing. And so you sort of want to build a calendar where you build these tools into your day, and then hopefully you see progress from it, and you can sort of experiment and decide what tools work for you instead of other people telling you this is a good tool, this is bad.
And in what sense, despite of like, I don't know, PTSD or some of these mental issues people can have, what other benefits do psychedelics or those also meditation and everything have for somebody who has not doing it yet, but I don't know, is looking for something.
Right. So I think there's some things that are I would say qualitative about it. Quantitative. There's some things that are quantitative about it, like things that you can measure. So for example, like I said, if they did a study where they gave it to alcoholics and there's like 80% LSD to alcoholics, like 80% of them were able to quit drinking. Okay. Or same with cigarettes. 80% of them at this Johns Hopkins study were able to quit smoking after 6 months. They were still not smoking from a single psilocybin experience. And so the curious part with that too is that the 80% that stopped smoking described their experience. They said they met God or they met the higher power. And if they met him, they were able to quit smoking. And if they didn't have a mystical experience and they didn't meet God, they were unable to quit smoking. So that's a sort of very like interesting quirk that, like I said, piques my curiosity. Like I wonder what's going on there, you know? And so there are things you can measure. Like I said, so for example, people stop smoking. That's awesome. That's something you can measure. But there's also something that you can't really measure as much. And there's a book called The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide by this guy named James Fadiman. He did that microdosing study I told you about with problem solving. And he documents all this. And it's kind of funny because you read these case reports and you have these people and they say things like, you know, me and my husband would go out to dance classes more. Or, you know, if I was very stuck up, you know, I started having a glass of wine a couple nights a week after dinner. Or if I was having too much to drink, I cut it back. If I was eating too much junk food, I stopped. If I never enjoyed myself, every Sunday I started going out to get a piece of cake. And it was sort of this weird thing where I guess you can't put it scientifically, but it seemed like people would enjoy they sort of enjoyed life more. They sort of enjoy doing these daily things and they sort of have a rejuvenation to it. Like if you have a cheeseburger, we were talking about this earlier, every day, nonstop, you're going to hate cheeseburgers. But if you've been on a fast for like a month with nothing but like juice, you're going to have a cheeseburger. It's going to be phenomenal. So you've got to kind of give yourself time to reset. And psychedelics a lot of times do that. It's sometimes almost like a reset button for people. Also, over a lifetime, it actually decreases suicidality. So people who take psychedelics are usually less likely to commit suicide, which I think is a very interesting thing as well. So it goes back to this enjoying the quality of life. Yeah, man. And then there's also one that's a little bit more hard to explain that I would say one of the, I guess, major benefits of psychedelics are, you hear people say like woke or like ego death. Those are like kind of the hit terms. But basically what a lot of people experience is it's what I would consider like a dissolution of the self. So if we want to get very, I guess, psychological about this, when you were a baby and you were born, there's an extended period of time where you did not realize you were you. Your arms moved, you cried, you wanted food, but you didn't recognize that was you doing that. And then one day, you know, however many months in, you sort of looked at your hand and you're like, Jesus Christ, I'm controlling this.
I can move that.
And that's a giant moment, right? And then as you get a little older, then you hear kids will start saying things like I and me, and they sort of start to develop this idea of the self or the ego as I'm separate from everything else. I'm not my mom. I'm not part of her. I'm separate from her. And that's like the terrible twos. They start to test that. Like, am I really independent, right? And so what's funny is when you take psychedelics, a lot of times you have this reversion to the state where you don't feel that separateness. You don't feel the sense of I. So you hear people say, like, I did a trip. It was with a bunch of people, and we all felt like one big group. Or I felt like connected with all of humanity. Or a lot of people describe it as meeting God. You know, I guess it depends on what your belief is. But people have these very heavy spiritual experiences, and they sort of become more conscious, like they recycle more. And like one of these guys, I believe his name is Ralph Metzner. He did psychedelics in college with Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, and he became all about saving the environment. And it's sort of like this thing there's no data on it, but it's like people take it and they want to be a better person. They want to be like a better dad, a better neighbor. Like I said, take care of the environment, you know, do their part a little more. So it kind of almost seems, I don't know how you would describe that. What do you think that is? Because there is no answer. Yeah, it's completely subjective on what's going on here. But
that's the thing. You or at least some people hear that they have such beneficial effects, and I think people are really, because they have the prejudice of having the psychedelics, that's really hard to get them into another opinion, or even be open about it. And for that, they really need to be convinced. And if you don't have the data for it, it's really hard to get somebody to that point. So at least for my personal opinion, I'm really interested or getting really curious once I hear about those positive effects of such things. But I'm still very hesitant to try it myself, obviously.
That's good, man. Don't ever be pressured into it.
No,
if it's something you feel ready for, that's a good time to. And it's like maybe you never feel fully ready. Like you should always have sort of like a fear or respect for it. But definitely don't do it if you don't want to do it. And there's a lot of other ways to sort of experience the same thing. But if you want to push into like really trippy territory, I think I told you about this as well. So if we're really pushing the boundary on what's going on here with psychedelics, the coolest thing to me, and this really like sets off this geek alert in my head, right? So I was raised Catholic in Sunday school, and so I grew up very religious, thinking about religion a lot. I never really agreed with it, and I would always challenge my teachers, and they would always they would never give me straight answers, but I was always very into religion and God. And what's going on? Where is God? Why isn't he here? Why can't I see him? When things go wrong, why isn't he helping? Things like that. So there's a substance called DMT, and for people who don't know what that is, it's dimethyltryptamine. It's a very potent, usually crystal, that you can smoke. You can put it in an IV drip. It is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, but you can't just eat it. If you do, you need an MAO inhibitor, which is, again, a whole other thing. But So the DMT, this is a psychedelic to where something like mushrooms or LSD this is a trip stretched over like sometimes a 4-hour period, 6 hours, sometimes with higher doses even extending to like 8-10 hours. But with DMT, it hits you immediately. It's like being shot out of a cannon. It lasts for like 10 to 15 minutes generally. And people who take this, it's not like an illusion in your head. So with mushrooms and with LSD, a lot of it is very cognitive. You close your eyes, you see patterns, you kind of have this inner narrative going on, and that's where the action takes place. With DMT, people feel like they're in a different universe, that they met aliens, they met different creatures, whatever. And it sounds like total nonsense. And the rational part of me goes, that's total nonsense, right? But they have this forum called Hyperspace Lexicon, and it's actually funny because Tim's involved in the story too, man. Like he was telling me about. We sort of talked about this, and he said, I had a friend, and he experienced like this jester, right? He smoked DMT, and he saw this jester, and the jester was sort of juggling, doing this thing. It was weird, and I didn't really think much of it. But then I saw this forum, Hyperspace Lexicon, and what they do is people all around the world try this drug, which is illegal, so don't do it. I'm not supporting it, but they do it, so whatever. I'm just reporting on it. And they try this drug, and then they document their experience, and they use very certain keywords, and then what Hyperspace does is they look through all the posts and they see if there's a reoccurring keyword. And a lot of times there are, and there's people who describe, like, I had this book and I couldn't read it, but I knew what it meant. And there's thousands of people who said, I had that same thing. And they report the same thing. And then I looked it up and I go through the list, and there it is, Hyperspace Jester. Just like Tim's friend described, and there's hundreds of people who've had this exact same experience. So it sort of raises the question of, when you're in this psychedelic state, is it a hallucination or is it something real, And I guess we'll find out. Like I said, it's a very interesting. I think we're going to start to really dive into understanding consciousness. Like the big question, like where do we come from? Why are we here? Like that's really at the base of all of this where my real motivation is. Like that's the stuff that really gets me excited. So I guess we'll see, man. There's a lot of interesting stuff coming up in the psychedelic field.
You also told me about what your actual plan is then progressing with to making it a concept out of it, a company, a business idea.
Right. So
maybe like briefly tapping into what your plan is on doing so.
Right. So it took me forever to really figure out a way to do this. But sort of the end goal for us is we want a space where people can come who are interested in it. Like responsible adults, right? Like there obviously has to be some sort of screening, but sort of a space that would be a lot like a gym or a lot like a spa. But instead of coming to work out or feel relaxed, you're coming for deep self-development. Like the book Deep Work, they describe the eudaimonia office. Where you basically go deeper into this until you're in this little think tank and you're alone and you're isolated and you can get a ton of stuff done. So I'm very interested in that concept. And so what our plan is right now is we're going to shoot 30-minute episodes for YouTube. And sort of the format that we have is, like I said, we've got a big list of all these things that people claim alter your states. Some of them are going to work, like, for example, psychedelics. Some of them are going to be bullshit, like, let's say, healing crystals. And maybe they're not bullshit. I've got to find out still. If you know someone who does healing crystals, I'd love to talk to them. But we're going to make a big list, and then we'll go through the list one by one, and we'll make an episode on each one. So, for example, Kambo is this psychedelic. It's the venom from a frog in the Amazon. And what the shaman or the practitioner does is they burn you with 3 little holes, and they scratch it off with a knife, and they take this toad venom, and they rub it into the wound. And it's basically like I guess the best way to describe it would be like a super intense fast. Like, let's say you fasted on just water for like a couple weeks. Yeah. That's what people do. It's like that shortened down into like 15 or 20 minutes. And apparently you get this I haven't done it yet, but apparently you get this very strong like body high. A lot of times there's vomiting, and then afterwards you feel clear and great. Cool, so that sounds interesting. We're going to do some research on it. We're going to look into the background, make sure it's safe. And then if it is, we actually know a girl here in Inchida who will soon be certified to be an official Kambo practitioner. So she'll do it on us, and there'll be a couple of us that try it. We'll test it out, we'll give our review of it, and we'll document the whole process. We'll say, here are the pros and cons, here's what we thought of it. It's sort of up to you to decide. If you want to do more research, here's some links. Yeah. And that's one little box. Next episode, it could be a sensory deprivation tank. It could be meditation. And it could even be negative things like alcohol or porn. And, we're very interested because porn alters your state in a very negative way long term. You lose a lot of confidence in yourself, seems to be one of the side effects of prolonged porn usage. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be things that we know are good. Like, we want to test things that might be bad, might be good, we don't know. And so that's basically going to be the format. And we figure that after like a year of that, right, of doing that we'll know enough about these states to say, all right, we know the tools that work and don't, and then we want to create a space where those tools that we think work, people can come and test them out in a safe environment with experienced professionals, I guess, if you want to call it that, around them. So maybe it's a space with an isolation tank or one of the light machines, or where people can attend meditation classes or yoga classes or dance classes, or where people can take psychedelics with a very safe setting. That's sort of the idea for the space, and I think it will be a cool concept for a lot of different reasons. I don't necessarily see it as therapeutic, a place for people to go to heal trauma. I think there's a lot of room for that to grow, and with the right people and people with a lot of experience, they could do that. Someone could make a really cool space. But I think the better idea for us is more of this angle of what can it do for self-development? Because like I sort of told you, I think that those are going to be the people who will end up being the most interested in it, and will garner the most attention to where we can really grow something that people...
And I guess also the most open to really get into this topic and get knowledge about it. And then maybe like as one of the later questions is, what is kind of your vision on how this whole field can be kind of go into culture or be having a positive effect over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so for example, I think we'll take the same path as marijuana did. So for a while, it was like, you're a loser if you smoke.
Yeah.
Wait, it might have some good side effects. Then it turned into weed is God. It cures everything. Weed cures cancer. There's sort of this overindulgence. It can never hurt me. Like, yeah, there are negative side effects. Paranoia being one of them, which is something I talked to Tim about earlier today. It seems like that's prolonged smoking marijuana in high amounts daily for years can lead to something like paranoia. The way that I see it, though, is that I think that, so there's a company called MAPS, and they're entering the stage 3 trials for MDMA-assisted therapy. So hopefully within the next couple of years, if someone has PTSD, they'll be able to go to their therapist. The therapist will be able to give them MDMA, which will help them sort of soften and open up. And then with the guidance of a therapist, they'll be able to sort of talk through this experience that they wouldn't be able to talk about otherwise. And so that is something that is less than a few years away.
So you would also combine it with traditional healing techniques or therapeutic techniques.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting, because I think that they're going to have a big job on their hands, because the people who are pushing, I think, psychedelics forward now into the sort of the almost every company uses a therapeutic angle. We can do this to make people feel better. That's why you should that's why you should fund it. That's why we should research it. But I think it's a lot of scientists that are doing it. And I think that if they don't include people like shamans in sort of this community that is not normally taken seriously, they'll miss the point. Because I think science is in its essence rational. And mystical states and altered states are not irrational, but transrational. You can't use rationality to describe what happened with my wife. You can't say, science, it says that she had a hallucination and now she believes that hallucination, and because she believes that lie, she doesn't have nightmares. Yeah. It's a very reductionist approach. So the way that I really hope that it goes in the next 10 years, and why our logo is half blue brain, half green brain, is sort of this reason that I think doctors need to work with shamans and healers that have sort of been using these tools for really thousands of years, and they've got to kind of find a way to balance the two out. And for me, I'm definitely not an expert enough to be able to do that field, to be able to, and there are a lot of people who take ayahuasca or mushrooms once and they say, I'm a shaman, and they start giving it to other people, and that's a really good way to fuck somebody up. And so I'm actually really nervous right now because in the Netherlands, there are ayahuasca retreats and they aren't regulated. Like you could open up an ayahuasca retreat tomorrow and technically it would be allowed, you know? Okay. And so there definitely has to be some sort of licensing, just like doctors are licensed. But at the same time, like people are adults, and it's not the drug, it's not the tool, it's not the technique, it's the person and how they use it. Like a car in the hands of an alcoholic is as dangerous as it gets. You know, it's not the car's fault, it's the person driving it, and I'm assuming that person does that all throughout their life. Maybe they eat too much, they this or they that. It's just about doing everything mindfully, not becoming addicted to things and using them as a crutch, but really using them as a tool. And so, I guess we'll see how it goes, man. I guess we'll see how it goes. The MDMA thing is cool. I think psilocybin in the States, magic mushrooms, is still a long way away from being legalized. And when it's legalized, it will first be approved for medical use, like marijuana, and then I think slowly then it will start to be recreational, which in that case, I don't think it's a bad idea to put into discussion needing a license to be able to buy psychedelics. You come in, you should have to take some sort of psychological test, make sure you're clear and good, and then get a license, just like with like a medical marijuana card. Like there should be, it does kind of scare me that anyone can walk into Cosmic Kitchen, 18 or older, and buy mushrooms. So as much as I love the Netherlands for their relaxed attitude, like
it's maybe too much.
Yeah, when mushrooms were made illegal a few years ago, a French girl came here. She was a tourist and she took some, allegedly. Some people say she never did. It's an unclear story, but she jumped off a bridge, and from that single incident, they banned all magic mushrooms. And so people really have to be careful. And this is, like I said, something that I'm glad, because Tim really reminds me of it, is like one person really making a big mistake can get it shut down for everybody. And it's the same in the States for substances like kratom, which can be used to help unaddict yourself to opioids, which is incredible. And there's people who've done it, basically unaddicted themselves to opioids using kratom. And there's like in a case in, I think, Michigan, where a guy got a batch and it was tainted. There was something else in it. He bought it from sort of a shady source. He took it and he died. And the mom said, we've got to make this substance illegal. And boom, they made it illegal. And now nobody else in that state can take it. They can't do research on it. And that's a big deal, because to then make it unillegal, it's like a 15, 20-year process. It's not like overnight. So we've got to be really, really careful. Everybody has got to be really careful how they use them, because one person can sort of ruin not the party, but they can sort of ruin it for everybody.
Maybe now, I think we talked about an hour, a bit more already, right?
Yeah, right around, man.
That maybe in the end you want to share still how people can get in contact with you, maybe follow you somewhere, and get more information, because that was obviously just the top of the iceberg.
It's tip of the iceberg for sure. What a good metaphor to use, man. It's definitely the tip of the iceberg. So you can find us on Instagram at tcu.intuda.
Yeah, put everything down there.
Yeah, you'll put it on the video?
Yeah.
Oh, man, technology.
Course, man.
Technology, you gotta love it. Our website's not done, but it actually will be done here in a few weeks. And so once
but you have the Sunflower Project is already done, right?
Yeah, the Sunflower Project's already done. So like I said with that, I think that my wife is going to primarily focus on the Sunflower Project, because when she decided, she actually made a video where she told her story, and when she decided to do that, she said, I had this traumatic thing happen to me, and then I had this beautiful thing happen to me. I'm not an expert, I don't know what to do about it, but I really want to help people, because I think people could benefit just from hearing the story and I guess deciding for themselves. Like, if you can drive to the Netherlands and it's legal, then it's within your rights to do that. And if that's something you want to try, yeah, there's a dangerous element to it, but there's also, a reward to it. And if somebody's thinking, really deep in this hole, it's not like, again, it's not a magic fix, but if you want to try it. And she wanted to help, and she wanted to tell her story, and she's like, I have no idea how to do it. And she would just tell me, like, this is my vision for it. And I kind of put together the logo and the name, and she really loved it. She really loves sunflowers, which is why it's called that, and built the whole thing. And like I said, I know that she's really passionate about it, and I'm really passionate about it as well. But in my mind, it's how can we help the most people? And for me, when we were in that field, like, there's not a lot of, like I said, not a lot of money in it. Not a lot of people take it seriously.
But you have to.
So those were the two problems that I wanted to solve with
the Patreon website as well. So people could donate for you and get this project off the ground.
Yeah, for sure. And that was sort of the idea when I originally came up. This was like a year ago. This is when I came up with the idea for the collective unconscious. It was sort of that if everybody had their own psychedelic projects. Like, we have the Sunflower Project. I'm really good with, like, web design, photos, and videos. There's a lot of people who aren't, but there's a lot of people that are good at things that I'm not good at. So the whole idea was to make the collective unconscious sort of this umbrella where if people wanted to work on projects, they could submit them to me, say, hey, I want to shoot this video, I have a really good idea for it, and we sort of help put together the team that can make it happen. So when you go to the website, there will actually be a page where you can submit project ideas. Like, if you have an idea, like, hey, I have this project, it'd be really cool to work on, I would love to do it, then you can post the project and we'll help you find people to fill the role. So the whole idea of the collective unconscious, the name actually comes from the psychologist Carl Jung. And he basically said that it's like springs of water, and when you go underground, it's one big pool. Right? It's not, we're all sort of radio antennas, or whatever you want to call it. But when you go underneath, it's one big thing. We're all generated from the same one thing. And that's what he referred to as the collective unconscious. And so it's this idea of one big whole. And also another one with collective in it, there's a phenomenon called collective interference. If you have one speaker, it sounds like one speaker. If you have two speakers side by side, they sound like four. If you have three speakers, they sound like nine. They sort of multiply and amplify. And so, we were just really excited to work with a lot of, like, these small projects who, like I said, maybe they don't know a lot about photos and videos. Perfect. We'll do it for you for free. But we would love if you'd show us different techniques, like meditation techniques or breathwork techniques, whatever it is.
That sounds pretty cool, man.
Yeah, I think it's going to be good. I think a lot of it will do good, because by them having a nice website and nice videos, they're more trustworthy, which in turn makes us more trustworthy, which in turn means more people will get helped. So
maybe what is the last thing you want to share to the audience about your thing, or like what is the most important thing you want to really say in terms of maybe psychedelics, but also maybe the effects or productivity or basically everything you're really passionate about right now?
So this is one that Tim actually reminded me of a few weeks ago, and we put it as one of the rules on our website. Like, Jordan Peterson has the 12 rules for life on our website. We made like 5 or 6 rules that, like, these are what we're going to live by. And one of the rules, I think number 4, is don't mistake hubris for compassion. And this is something that Tim told me, and it's something that sat with me really deep, and it sort of solves a lot of problems in my head. And so if anybody doesn't know what this means, hubris is sort of like pride and sort of this egotistical, like, attitude of me, like this extreme pride in yourself. And it's really, really easy to pretend like you're doing something to help others, but you're really doing it for yourself. Like, it's easy to say, I want to help other people, but then all the photos are of you, and to sort of get swept away in it. And there's examples of this, when we made this video with my wife, it was something that I really kept in mind. Like, she wanted to tell her story, and we wanted to help people, but how do you reach out to people without sort of using her story to sort of get things? And so I would say when people, if they really want to make a change, or they're really passionate about helping other people or whatever else, like, make sure that you're really doing it for the right reasons, and ask the question, like, how can I help? Because there's a lot of good that can be done. And then the other one that we have on there too is don't let the bastards grind you down. Yeah. There's sort of like a mock Latin phrase, but there's this bar in Chicago, me and Mark talked about it. Kingston Mines, there's a big sign, don't let the bastards grind you down. Which just means if you have a new idea, if you have an idea that sounds a little crazy, it's going to be very easy to get discouraged, and a lot of people are going to tell you it won't work. But I'm excited to prove them wrong and see where this thing ends up in a few years. So yeah, man, just cool. Like, not Mark, but who's the other? Nick. Nick, yeah. He's got all these crazy ideas, man. I don't think anybody would have ever thought that lens ball or that the air Nerf ball would be that successful, but they were, man. It's incredible. It's incredible. So, yeah.
Thanks so fucking much. Thanks a lot.
That's my whole spiel. Oh, thank you, man. This was awesome. I really enjoyed this.
It's a lot of fun.
Did we split this up well? Did I talk too much? Did we get it even?
You talked a lot. Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
But you have the knowledge in this case, so it's totally fine.
Yeah, I was wondering what's polite on that. I was actually thinking about that too after we got done with the lens ball meeting. I was like, I didn't want to talk a majority of the time. They just kept asking me questions.
Yeah, because it's really interesting, man.
In sales, like, they taught us techniques to like make the other person talk, and I remember I would like take a question, turn it into a new question, bounce it back at you guys, and I'm like, I've got them, and then you guys would bounce that back at me as a question. I'll take it.